Dig a little bit deeper into the expansion of all of this. I'm joined by David Gartenstein-Ross from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Heard a lot of analysts today saying the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm sure you heard all of this as well, basically indicating that suddenly Assad, who was seen as an enemy, now is also arrayed against ISIS. The United States feeling much the same way. But Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary for Britain, said, if I know anything about the Middle East, it's that the enemy of my enemy of the friend, none of that stuff makes sense.
Right.
So I want to get your take on this. Is there a possibility that Assad and Obama may be on the same side in terms of going after the same enemy?
They're certainly on the same side in terms of going after the same enemy, no question about that. And Iran is also on that same side. I think that we do need to have a different discussion about what the end game is in Syria. Right now, U.S. political discourse holds that the only acceptable end is Assad out of power. And I question that. The reason why is not because I have any sympathy for Assad. He's a brutal dictator. We know exactly what he did. He's gassed his own people. He's slaughtered so many. But right now, U.S. intelligence estimates that the civil war could go on for a decade. If so, Syria will be destroyed as a country, similar to how Afghanistan, 1979, it was a very prosperous, forward-leaning country. Then you had the Soviet invasion and a war that lasted a decade, and Afghanistan has been at war ever since. You've had generations that know nothing but war, and there's a real risk of that in Syria, even independent of ISIS. This will help extremist organizations. It'll cause the collapse of a country that's at the very heart of one of the most important regions in the world.
There were some people yesterday who we had on our air who were very critical of President Obama for not striking at Assad, and that really gave root to this. Do you believe there's any truth to this? I mean, what can you tell us about ISIS and how it just grew and became this monster, if you will?
Those are the two sides of the arguments. I mean, on one side, there are people who think that Obama made a mistake by not striking Assad. Others think that Obama made a mistake by hastening things too much, and I would fall on the latter side. In particular, I'd point to the U.S. intervention in Libya and how that had a ripple effect throughout North Africa, but there was a bit of a ripple into Syria as well. Libyan arms did go into Syria during the course of the conflict, and after the U.S. intervened in Libya, that helped to embolden the Syrian rebels. At any rate, when you get to the growth of ISIS, one of the main ways that ISIS was able to grow, at that point, ISIS was a part of the Al-Qaeda network. It was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and you also had the Nusra Front, which was a Syrian affiliate, and the Syrian rebels were looking to any help they could get. And increasingly, ISIS, Nusra became very much embedded as a part of the rebellion. Now, I should say, though, that ISIS always had trouble playing well with others. That's the reason why it got booted out of the Al-Qaeda network. It was fighting not only with the Nusra Front, which was also a group of jihadists, but also with a large number of other Syrian rebel factions.
Interestingly enough, Jessica alluded to this. President Obama referred to them as a JV team, and I heard an expert earlier this week saying that this is a group of nobodies, and yet yesterday, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel had a different take, and yet he can't put a number. How many of them are out there? You study this stuff. I mean, how serious a threat are they? How many of them are there? Or do we even know?
Well, I critiqued President Obama's statement of the JV squad at the time. I thought that was an extraordinarily reckless thing to say. But that being said, when we look at ISIS right now, I think two things are happening simultaneously, which is, number one, ISIS is being overestimated. And number two, Al-Qaeda is being underestimated. There's this view that ISIS has completely eclipsed Al-Qaeda. So first of all, your question, how many are there? No more than 30,000. I think the most credible number is around 20,000. But there's some guesswork involved in all of the estimates. But they're not this massive organization. They're committing a large number of errors. They're not nobodies. I mean, you don't come to control the territory that they do by simply being nobodies. But what they are is they revel in bloodshed in a way that we simply have not seen in our lifetimes. I mean, even for a jihadist group, they're extraordinarily brutal. And that's going to come back to harm them, similar to the way Al-Qaeda in Iraq, 2005 to 2007. A lot of people thought that Zarqawi, who was also famous for beheadings, had eclipsed Osama bin Laden. That proved to be wrong, in part because he very much overplayed his hand. That brutality tarnished his image, turned everyone against Zarqawi and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And similarly, ISIS has made nothing but enemies. In the longer term, I think Al-Qaeda has a better strategy.
We saw this video earlier this week, this gruesome beheading, but we heard the voice of a Westerner, a man from London. They've nicknamed him Beetle. Talk to us about the seduction quality. What is it that Westerners would be seduced to go and join a group like ISIS? How does that happen?
There's no single answer to it. I mean, there's a variety of things Westerners are looking for. For some, it's, and especially at the beginning of the conflict, it was looking at these pictures of Syrian children and the slaughter that was being perpetrated by the Assad regime. People came out of genuine humanitarian concern. Another reason is many people are radicalized, especially those who join ISIS. There are also other Syrian rebel factions, but even looking at social media postings, you can see that many are radicalized before they go over there. Some are looking for sense of adventure. I think there are very different paths into jihadist militancy, and in the case of ISIS, you can see all of those paths at work.
All right. David, always a pleasure having you in. Thanks for your analysis. Appreciate it.
Great joining you.